Let me quick introduce the crew that we have, and then we can dive into it. So, I am Matthew Volm, CEO and co-founder of RevOps Co-op. We've got a global community of almost 15,000 people in revenue operations. Free to join. I will put the link for the community into the chat, so anyone who is not a member can check us out and see what we're all about there. But with me, I've got three people who are a lot smarter and more knowledgeable on this topic than I am. And so I've got Ryan Milligan, who is the VP of Sales and RevOps over at QuotaPath. I have David Chang, who is the VP of Biz Dev and Partnerships over at Pandadoc, and Jack Coopersmith, who is the Commerce GTM and Onboarding Manager over at HubSpot. Ryan, I'll turn it over to you to pull up the slides. And just as
Sure.
Ryan's doing that, then we start to dive into the discussion for today. Going to take questions as we go. So if anybody has anything on their mind, whether it's questions as we go through the deck, we've got the chat and the Q&A. So feel free to throw stuff in there. I'll be keeping an eye on that as we go throughout. And like I said, we'll be taking questions as we go. So with that, Ryan, I'll turn it over to you to dive in.
Perfect. Thanks, Matt. Hi, everyone. I'm Ryan. I lead the RevOps and sales teams here at QuotaPath. Really excited for this topic today. One thing I will say is that these conversations are most productive with active chat. We've done a number of RevOps Co-op webinars and people who are actively engaged and asking questions in chat. We can answer them along the fly. You came here for a reason, right? So let us answer those questions along the way. So I'll echo Matt's point here. I'm really excited to talk to Jack and David today. I'm going to set the stage a little bit up front solo and then jump into some more of the conversation. And a lot of these stats aren't going to be surprising, but I find them really helpful to share. We took some data from CapChase's 2023 and 2024 sales cycles trends report, and we're seeing a lot of drag and inefficiency in go-to-market ecosystem today, right? So sales cycles have been getting longer, have become 3.8 weeks longer on average across all companies surveyed. 81% of revenue leaders say that flexible payment and challenges with flexible payment is a challenge and driving a lot of churn. And so getting that financial billing component at the end of a cycle has been a really big pain point for people in sales cycles. Discounts are really driving down revenue and leading to gaps in potential revenue when customers are surveyed. And then billing is taking up a ton of time, right? So all of these things are thematically around that last mile of the deal where you've done all the work to get the POC excited. Maybe you run a proof of concept or multiple. You've multi-threaded very actively. You're picked as vendor of choice. And now you have to go through the final stages. And so both David from Pandadoc, myself, and Jack from HubSpot can talk a lot about how you can use HubSpot as that central ecosystem and pull in different partners in order to drive speed to close and make this like a really seamless process between sales, finance, and account management. So just wanted to set the stage a little bit there as well. So one of the first things we're going to jump through is, it's well known, but the big requirement here is streamlining end of sales practices. So improving these quote and contract timing, speeding up approvals, ensuring that smooth handoff between a signed contract and driving right revenue. David, you and I were talking a little bit about this yesterday about how you all at Pandadoc think about kind of speed to close and driving speed of approval and moving through this process quickly. Would love to hear how you all think about solving that problem.
Sure. I think we'd approach it from two different directions. For people who are not familiar with Pandadoc, really our mission is to be a single source of truth for all the document workflows required to close an agreement. Starting with document generation, providing CPQ for pricing and quoting, then providing a lot of collaborative tools such as approval workflows and redlining capabilities, and then finishing with legally binding electronic signature. And we also have the ability to collect payments directly from invoices created in Pandadoc. Where it really all comes together is seamlessly integrating with HubSpot. So HubSpot being the data source of truth, we're able to pull all of that information about the opportunity, about the account. We're also able to pull in pricing tables and information such the different SKUs, and then we're able to configure all the different rules to improve the quote and contract timing and creation. Along with that, with e-signature, we're seeing that utilization of Pandadoc in association with CRM tools, especially HubSpot. We're seeing an increase in win rates by over 35, 36%. We're also seeing a 50% reduction in all of the manual work. So the ultimate goal here, the ultimate outcome that we shoot for is increasing win rate, win faster. As we know, time kills all deals. So let's build in automation and workflow in conjunction with your system of record to help you close faster. Also, we all are living in an environment where we're asked to do more with less. So Pandadoc also, by eliminating a lot of the manual processes that salespeople or RevOps leaders need to deal with, streamlining that allows salespeople to do what they should be doing, which is developing new accounts or building on their existing relationships.
Yeah, and so it sounds like a lot of it is putting more autonomy in the seller to to ask the questions and make the changes they need to from a contract perspective, and then not having as many like clunky handoff processes. It's interesting, Jack, a lot of what you're working on with Commerce Hub is similar thematically, right? It's centralizing the seller within HubSpot and letting them grab what they need from CRM or from Commerce Hub or from other places in order to get these deals done faster.
Ton of it is about empowering teams to work together and make sure that they can all work in the same place and view the same information. And I think that's borne out in the stats that David, you just mentioned there. Taking a step back, one thing that HubSpot has talked a lot about for many years now is powering your business's flywheel, which is, of course, removing friction and adding force. And David, those numbers, first of all, are amazing, but it sounds like it's about a third more force, the flywheel, closing more deals, and then half the amount of time, half the amount of friction to actually make that happen, which is absolutely awesome. And a lot of that is indeed working from one single source of truth, not having multiple tabs open, but also not having to reach out to that person in the back office to say, hey, I know you were on vacation last week. Did you end up getting the option to send out that invoice, for example? Did they pay that invoice? And so it's about empowering teams to work from the same place, but also letting those people who are working with your customers already continue to finish the swing all the way through to actually recognizing that revenue. And again, that's a heck of a lot easier to do if they are working in one place where they're already quite comfortable working, which ideally is likely in their CRM, often HubSpot CRM, of course.
Yeah, and so one of the questions that came up in chat that I wanted to call out were Chris's question about motivating right types of revenue and isn't that done pre-qual? It's interesting, Chris, from a commissions perspective and like motivating the right behavior. Oftentimes, some of these things that take a lot of hang up, like contract duration, payment terms, any sort of redlining, case study agreement, all of that sort of stuff often happens after vendor of choice selection, right? So you've done a lot of your qualification for the deal, you've gotten them excited, you give them like a rough range of pricing, and then you get into kind of negotiation. And this is actually where we find a lot of reps slip up and take too much time if they're not motivated to close the right type of revenue. And by right type of revenue, it can be, hey, longer term contracts, can you accelerate their commission rate for a longer term contract? Or can you accelerate their commission rate as a function of payment terms? Maybe you don't pay them commissions until cash is received. It's one of the things that I think a lot about in this is how are you using the comp plan to change the seller's behavior so that regardless of where that compensation plan is tracked, they know what type of contract terms they should be shooting for to make the most amount of money. And we've done this with our own business. We've done this with a lot of customers' businesses, help them to say, hey, maybe a lot of your revenue was on month-to-month contracts before. Accelerate the commission rate for single year, migrate more of your customer base to 1-year contracts, and then accelerate for multi-year so that sellers know, hey, if I close this deal as a 1 year, I'll make 10%, or as the multi-year, I'll make 15 or 16% or something like that. It's an interesting like parallel in terms of right type of revenue for the business, like what type of contract terms in that revenue are going to be helpful for longer term success. I was interested too, David, one of the things you were talking about is how these teams are using Pandadoc in order to drive this speed to close. I'm curious, like kind of from a best practices, and this is more contracting agnostic, right? What do you see as ways that people are using their contracts and their contracting process, like best in class to drive speed to close? What are, FAQs on commonly answered red lines or resources for common pushbacks or testimonials, or that's like, how do you think that regardless of the contracting platform, teams are using their contracting tool effectively to drive speed to close?
Yeah, I think from a sales perspective, our sales leadership really focuses on deal reviews, really pressure testing how a deal can go wrong. Rather than getting a status, hey, this is in stage 2, it's moving to stage 3, it is really identifying all the different elements that could go south and making sure that our sales reps are prepared to address those. So if that friction arises, then the sales rep is already prepared to answer that and objection handle that. So I think that's key in the forecasting process, just to make sure that information is uncovered. From a tooling perspective, I think speaking to RevOps folks on the call today, it's all about identifying areas where you could have inaccuracies that, errors in the contracting, errors in the quoting, anything to slow the deal down. We want to identify that and make sure that we solve for that with our processes and tools. So we just recently released our CPQ product for HubSpot. And now we enable RevOps leaders to build very complex rules and workflows to really guide the seller through the process. So the seller's not manually building quotes. They're actually able to pull that product catalog directly from HubSpot into Pandadoc. And as a result, there's an actual workflow that the customer or the salesperson will go through. And so what you've done is you've put more power in the RevOps leader's hands, but what they've done is effectively freed up much more time in reducing errors for sales to close.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I like your question around what does it take? What are the risks to the deal? It's like one that's not like specifically asked enough. I took over leading our sales team here at QuotaPath about a year ago. I've been a RevOps practitioner for many years now and took over leading our sales team about a year ago. And that has been like the most fruitful question I've added to pipe reviews is why you forecasted this deal for this month. Why won't it close? And it allows you to basically go through, have the seller tell you, oh, it's because we haven't kicked off contract review yet, or we haven't agreed on X, Y, and Z, and we need this time. And flipping the kind of cash in the eyes seller mentality to like the RevOps pragmatist, okay, mathematically, I don't think you have a path mentality proves super fruitful in prepping for these conversations. Because oftentimes what we find is you do all this work up front. Maybe you're in a 120-day sales cycle. You've done 100 days of work, 116 days of work of prepping and getting into good shape and doing multiple POCs and getting someone excited. And then you're jamming red lines, pricing negotiations, contract reviews all into the last 4 days. And for me last year on a couple of deals, that was December 28th through 31st, right? Which was my wife was not thrilled about. So like you're jamming all this stuff into a very short period of time. And my learning has been, how do you pull that, even if you're on a second demo in November and you're timelining for end of December, how do you start to have those conversations early around, do you have a red line process? Do you have contract review? Who's going to sign? Like getting more confident earlier on proves fruitful here too.
I'll also add, just from sellers' perspective too, sales leaders and sellers themselves want their teams to focus on building relationships, getting to know the customer, understanding their problem. They don't want their teams spending a bunch of time thinking about, oh, I can't add this product with this one together, or this is the minimum discount. And so being able to bring everything together and use tools like Pandadoc will allow for those reps to focus their mind share on their customers and building relationships, and not these admin things that are important without a doubt, but don't have to spend that much mental energy on, ideally. So it frees up time for folks to spend it the way that they probably want to anyway.
Yeah. And I think what we'll talk through a little bit today is like some of the signals of stalling deals and like managing these deal changes and like how this stuff comes up. I think it's a great point. Jack, if you give people the ability to have less of their time spent on some of these more challenging approaches, they can do some of the stuff that they're frankly more excited to and better at doing, which is the big focus here for sure.
I've got one question before we move on. And maybe I'll ask, I don't know if I should ask Jack or David this question. David, I'll ask you because you're at Pandadoc, the contract management company. So we were talking just before about manual processes, right? How we can streamline things, a lot of like sending out order forms and contracts and all this stuff, right? Most folks typically start manually, and then eventually you transition or move that over to an actual tool or product like a Pandadoc that can help. So before I share the results of the poll, I just asked people if they have an actual solution in place today to help them streamline some of that that's integrated into their CRM, or if they're just doing things manually and separately today. So I'm just curious, what do you think the breakdown is between people who are using a solution versus those who don't have anything in place, percentage-wise?
Oh, wow. That's a loaded question, Matt. I would say most people have some sort of solution. The question is it the correct solution? Can it really maximize your time? Can it really maximize your efficiency? I think it's very important to really analyze whatever tool you're using for contract management to make sure that it does all the things that you want it to do. So, for example, with HubSpot, our sellers, they don't want to leave HubSpot, all right? People who are using HubSpot, they don't want to learn another tool. So, have you created an experience within HubSpot that enables them to seamlessly interact with sorry, the poll just jumped up, with our
Yeah.
tools? The second thing is HubSpot enables that through their CRM cards, UI extensions. Another area that was something to look at would be automations. Matt, you talked about the progression from manual to maybe some tooling, and then I think the next level is really automating. So you're not collecting data in HubSpot and in Pandadoc. You're automatically updating records, fields, objects within HubSpot based upon actions from within Pandadoc. We'll talk about this a little bit more about how to utilize a lot of these automations to provide visibility to how deals might stall. But these are some of the other things to consider when you're choosing a tool.
Yeah.
It's
Makes
interesting.
sense.
David brings up the app cards component. It's one of the things that I think HubSpot has done an incredible job of. Is I think the team was talking about kind of like a crafted, not cobbled approach, which I love that phrase, which is you have a CRM that's built for the seller and how the seller operates. And so the new app card releases give sellers the ability to run their entire workflow like directly embedded within HubSpot in a way that doesn't feel like clunky and attached. And so the QuotaPath team spent a lot of time on this with app cards and forecasting your earnings. And if you change the component of a deal, like a 1 year to a 2 year, how much more money you'll earn, and seeing your commissions in real time in the same way that Pandadoc and others were building like within app cards. And so if you haven't checked out some of the new apps they've come out with and teams have come out with, like it is a real game changer on how sellers can feel like they feel built by HubSpot, right? They feel like external app tools that make your sellers much more efficient. And it's something that we've been super excited about here as well. So I'm glad you mentioned that, David. It's been very cool to see. And I know Jack's excited about it too.
Yeah. And I'll let you move on to the next topic, but for anyone out there who feels like they might be alone and like the last people that are still processing Google Docs or PDFs or things separately outside of their CRM, you're not alone. Apparently, about 75-80% of people here are still doing things that way and not leveraging a tool to help them. So I'll let you have at it again, Ryan.
Sorry, Jack, you were gonna hop. I think you were gonna hop in for a second, so I was just giving you space too.
I'm quite surprised by the results of that poll. For the record, I would have guessed about a third of people were manual, and it looks like it was much more than that. I'd also bet that there are at least 3 or 4 different tools involved in that manual process, anything from like Microsoft Word to a DocuSign, which we can definitely help streamline in a big way. And also on UI extensions, when I first heard about this a while ago, these app cards, I honestly didn't really understand it actually until I saw the QuotaPath solution and the Pandadoc solution. So this is a really cool group that we have here because we all are really enabling our customers to manage absolutely everything within HubSpot, from marketing to sales to closing the deal to contracting to being able to actually say, this is the amount of money you as a sales rep will receive if you can close that deal, all the way into, of course, delighting those customers as well. So it's incredible that we're able to give our customers the experience that they have that is as clean as it is and as holistic as it is with these new UI extensions and app cards. So thank you, Ryan, David, and team for driving this forward and really solving for our customers, because I'm just blown away by how smooth it is.
Let's jump into I'd love to get into like, how do you find these drivers of these stalled deals? These are some of the questions that I tend to ask the team. Like Jack, you were talking about different tools involved between agreements and getting paid. This is some of the metrics that I tend to look at, like deal stage time for quotes, loss for regrettable reasons, your percentage of closed won deals with subpar terms. Like these are the ones that I tend to think about. Where I actually gravitate to is your percentage of closed won revenue with subpar terms. People don't track this sort of stuff, but you really want to start tracking what percentage of your deals have opt-out clauses or have auto renew turned off or are in a bad payment cycle in terms of like duration and payment days, or are in a shorter term contract than you want? And how do you use your process in place to drive the seller to bring on more customers with better payment terms that are more advantageous to the business? Whether that's your comp plan process, your contracting process, like all these different things, drive a seller to deliver what great revenue looks like, which is longer term, cash up front, committed, not a ton of red lines type of revenue. So that's how I tend to look at this. But I'd be interested, David, when you think about how the team is navigating some of these audits, like what are the big things that you find that your customers are thinking about specifically?
Sure. It's a great question. So I think the way that we want to operate is at the end of a deal cycle or a stall deal, there's definitely signals that can come up prior to the deal stalling that indicate that the deal is in jeopardy or has a probability of getting pushed out. So what is that? Fundamentally, when we have conversations with our customers, it really foundational communication. If you see that the communication is starting to wane, or you're seeing that they're not scheduling follow-up meetings, if you see that they're not responding quickly, that is an absolute indicator that a deal could be going south or could be stalled. I think that from a tooling perspective, we do see from Pandadoc, we can track all the analytics associated where a contract is in the cycle. We can see who's opened the contract, how much time have they spent on the contract. We also see when the contract gets actually reviewed, redlined, et cetera. So all that information we can tell. It's actually a good sign for us when we see a contract getting redlined because it shows a level of engagement. Again, lack of engagement, lack of communication is really where we pull up a red flag. Where this is fantastic working with HubSpot is, again, the automations that we talked about. We can pull those signals back into your HubSpot opportunity record so you know that, hey, somebody opened up a contract, but it's been 10 days since they've opened it up a second time. That's a red flag. So we can provide that visibility into HubSpot virtually and provide some more predictability around close dates and close forecasts.
Yeah, it seems some of this stuff is around, hey, if comms are accelerating or decelerating, that becomes a signal of a deal going stale or going cold and not getting the contract term components. I mean, Jack, I'm curious, with a sales team as large as you have at HubSpot, like, what are some of the things that you feel like the org is looking at additionally to understand, okay, these are drivers of some of these stalled deals?
I would definitely echo everything that David just mentioned, and the ability to streamline things when it comes to automatically setting that task for a given rep to reach out in a world where maybe they're reviewing it for more than X minutes, but didn't actually sign it or didn't actually pay it. The automation is absolutely huge. I'd say there's a lot of other data too that you have at your fingertips that folks have often overlooked within the HubSpot platform. For example, whenever you reach out to someone, there's the recent sales email send date, obviously, and then there's an open date. We can give you those analytics and a reply date. So if you wanted to simply set up an automation set to say, we sent them this email, they engaged with it, but they never replied to it, that can help deals move a little bit forward as well. A couple of other reports that we look at quite closely. Time in deal stage together with the conversion rates between your deal stage. So a good old funnel report on the ladder is super helpful for us to just understand where a deal's getting stuck. And then, of course, you can double click into specific teams. HubSpot is obviously quite a big company, and we're cut up our sales team based on the number of employees. And so we're always able to take a big step back and say, what are the trends that we're seeing in the corporate segment versus the small biz segment, for example, and then make decisions around there. Ultimately, though, it's really all about having all of your data in one place. And as HubSpot continues, like every other tech company nowadays, to lean into artificial intelligence, I don't have a crystal ball on this front. I wish I did, but all I know is that data is going to continue to be the lifeblood of any type of predictive scoring model. And ultimately, if your data is going to be distributed in a ton of different places, it's likely not going to be helping you all that much in the future. And so having everything, again, centralized in one place, both today and looking forward into the future, whatever it entails, is going to be super powerful to have everything in one place, both on the commerce side and the customer side of things.
Absolutely. Ryan, you mind going back? I wanted to comment on your bullet point around quality revenue. So we're looking at closed won deals at subpar terms, deals lost for regrettable reasons. There was a slide about overwhelming discounting that's going on in the market today. I think from our sales leadership's perspective is you're inevitably going to have to negotiate a deal, right? There's going to be some give or get there. And what our sales leadership really pushes on is making sure you don't give a discount without, for example, you talked about this earlier, Ryan. Maybe you do a multi-year term, like I'll give you a 15% discount, but you got to sign for 2 years. Or they're looking for a discount and maybe, there's some payment terms, right? Can you close it by the end of the year or can, reduce your payment term from net 45 to net 30? So there's a lot of this give and get associated with the deals that really is just part of our sales processes. We hope to mitigate some of the bad revenue.
Yeah, and I think the big thing that I've tried to do from an operational perspective leading a sales team has been kind of standardizing those like give and gets that the team has in pocket. So the playbook of give and gets, hey, this discount is tied to this contract duration or what have you. But then also having some of the give and gets be non-quantitative components, right? So things like agreeing to testimonials or case studies, especially if switching from competitors, or agreeing to do reference calls, like having that being contractually tied, you can start to think through some of those things that are potentially like less cost risk for the customer or cash risk, but you have a lot of value in as a business and use those to drive out of stalled deals, right? You think about how much would you pay for a customer to say consistently on 10 reference calls in the next 90 days that they switched from your biggest competitor to you because of X, Y, and Z failings with the competitor. Like if you wrote that number down, you'd pay a lot of money in terms of the effects of that over time. And so how can you navigate something like that, which historically is not super quantified in a sales process, and have that be a carrot that the rep can have in their pocket in exchange for better terms for the customer. So it's a lot of what we've been thinking about here operationally, and having that direct playbook to say, you give this, you get this. And these are like the fantasy football style trades you're like agreeing to do basically. And we talk about this kind of solutioning here. One that I've been really focused on with our go-to-market team has actually been walking through the entire process from vendor of choice to signed contract, like writing down all the steps that have to happen in order for this to happen and figure out where are the places where you can cut some of those steps out. Centralizing around the tech is obviously incredibly helpful here, but actually writing down, okay, you send a contract, you agree to the terms, you send a proposal, here's the red lines. What does that actually take and what's that journey look like? And where are the places that you can either leverage AI or leverage better playbooks or leverage centralizing in HubSpot in order to drive that down. So interested, both Jack and David, your thoughts on how you feel like you're solving for some of these bigger problems we talked about before.
Jack, you want to go? You want me to go first?
You can touch on it first and then I'll pick it up after if that's okay.
Sure. So Ryan, I think what you just touched on really resonates. Really mapping out the whole customer journey and understanding where there's points of potential friction and where you can bring in automation as well to, once again, you're just trying to like reduce that cycle time, constantly trying to reduce that cycle time. So I think that you want to combine that along with developing experience that makes it easier to take that load off of salespeople. When we talk about automation from a Pandadoc perspective, everything has to have a bidirectional sync. Any information that is captured in a red line or in a contract, that information different from source of system of record, we need to be able to update that information automatically into your account or opportunity or whatever object is containing that data. So that bidirectional sync is really important. I think what we also want to enable is creating a platform that allows either customers or solutions partners to readily, quickly, easily create custom automations on behalf of their customers. So we also introduce that when we work with the HubSpot ecosystem, so they can actually customize workflows and automations for each customer's specific processes. I think a third thing that we try to do, for example, in our CPQ product, we're building out different workflows. So we know about renewal work, CX workflows, new business workflows, et cetera. So we want to have those prepared for customers and easily configurable So we can have our partners configure those workflows for our customers so they can go through a seamless journey across each step. And again, it's digitizing, Ryan. What you're talking about is like understanding that full process and working with our customers to make sure we enable that experience for them.
And it's also interesting, like you have to put your mind a little bit in the seller's shoes, which has been a lot of my learning taking over the sales team here has been at every stage of the process where you're looking to gather data from a RevOps perspective. You ask the question, what's in it for the seller, which I think is really fruitful. Like, why do they care about not waiving auto renewal? Or why do they care about the payment terms? Or why do they care about the duration of the contract? And whether that's they care because they're going to earn more money from like a comp plan perspective, and they can see very clearly in CRM, hey, I'm going to earn more money for a net 33-year deal than I am for a net 91-year deal. And they can see that live and that changes their behavior. Or if they just know from a process perspective that they're either unable to or frowned upon to sign contracts with certain types of terms, and they're being measured on that by their manager, hey, last quarter, you led the team in like highest percentage of quarterly payments, for example, like either whether it's through the comp plan design or whether it's through the management style, if they know in real time the implication that a subpar revenue driver is going to have for them one way or another, or great revenue is going to have more carrot than stick, that can really like change their behavior in real time so that on the 30th, they're not talking about like subpar payment terms for the org or anything like that. So I think it's a great thought as well. Just keeping an eye on time. I know we're moving along here. I do want to talk about
one question for just before we move on related to the automation mostly. So Jack, question for you. And David mentioned that Pandadoc has these capabilities, but just want to ask automation, or I guess lack thereof, when it comes to line item based workflow specifically for the deal, wanting to make sure they didn't miss anything at inbound or since inbound. Can HubSpot do anything natively there?
I'd want to learn a little bit more about the exact specifics. So feel free to drop it in the chat. Feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn or even just shoot me an email. If you, I will say though, when it comes to a lot of the like deeper line item functionalities, David and team have very much solved for a lot of this. I will say though, what you did likely hear a decent amount at inbound was the whole concept of unified data. Now, that both means what we've been discussing today, bringing everything together in one place. It also has this infrastructure ramification when it comes to how HubSpot is actually built. And what that means is everything is essentially going to be becoming an object within our platform. And so line items, as you may have noticed, now has an index page. It's no longer just stuck within settings. And so we're going to continue to make products a little bit more object-y and a little bit more consistent throughout the entire platform. So more to come in a world if we can't solve exactly what you're looking to today for us. Though, David, not sure if you have anything up your sleeve. I bet you do, though, because I know that this is something you and your team have thought quite a bit about.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I'm not going to embarrass myself by being a solutions engineer. So Chris and Jessica would love to have a little bit of a deeper conversation with you. And I'm sure Matt and you can provide my contact info, but would love to introduce you to people that are smarter than me on the specific capabilities associated with renewals or line item workflows and triggers associated with our CPQ product.
And then last thing, David, maybe this is for you as well as, or Jack, yes, no, or maybe so, should, when it comes to using a custom object to capture contracts and agreements, should folks do it? Should they
It
not do
really
it?
depends on.
Should they maybe do it? Are you going to give the classic answer of it depends? We have
It
we have a
is,
RevOps co-op
but I
t-shirt
think
with that on,
no,
by
I
the
think
way.
you'd want to standardize in the opportunity record where the document is synced back. So I would think that would be at an account level or an opportunity level within HubSpot. We also will store that document obviously within Pandadoc as well, so you would have access to it in both systems. And
I'm pretty anti-custom object.
yeah,
Sorry to interrupt you there, David.
Yeah.
just
Yeah,
from a
makes sense.
scalability perspective, as you want to integrate different systems, like I don't think it depends, Matt. I think it's a no if you can know
Yeah.
would
Yeah.
be my
Yeah.
take. If you can know, no. There are extenuating circumstances in which that probably requires a yes for if you have certain components or you're integrating with different systems that are like more native or what have you. But I think it's more of a no if you can make it no, basically.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
Matt, for me, I don't know why you would want to store your agreements in a custom object versus a standard object. Maybe there's some outside use case that I'm not familiar with, but I don't know why you'd want to do that. But
Yeah.
I'm sure there are cases where you would.
All right. So Ryan, I'll turn it back to you. I know we've
Yeah, you're
got
totally.
two more buckets of stuff to get through. We got about
Yeah.
14 minutes of
So
time.
I think one of the ones that we can talk about from a sales process perspective is these last minute deal changes like redlining, negotiation, payment terms, what have you. And I think some of the things that I've been focused on with our team have been, and we talked about this a little bit before, like kind of these clear guardrails and giving the buyer a clear understanding of like the quoting and signing process and asking a lot of that up front. It is not too early on a first demo to have your sellers say, hey, if we are the right partner for you, this is how we typically like navigate contracting conversations. It makes you look confident and prepared and like you've won a bunch of deals in the past, which you have. And then asking the buyer, how are you feeling about that as well? The other piece is really earlier on in the process, the seller can then, using app cards, understand their path to quota and like forecast how this deal will impact their earnings earlier on and be incentivized to drive the right type of behavior and drive those like longer term contracts. So there's a lot of clear stuff that we tend to drive in terms of avoiding subpar contract terms. The key things are pull a lot of this as upfront in the deal process as possible, and then show the seller what's in it for them. At the end of the day, it is easier to close 10 small 1 year deals than it is to close one big enterprise 5 year deal. But if you make it worth the seller's while to be interested in these longer term or enterprise or whatever types of contracts, they will shift their behavior and they will shift their thinking. We've done this throughout the course of time with a lot of our customers and seen pre-post where, pre-rolling out this from a visibility perspective, a seller would say, hey, here's a 1 year deal, and this is what you get for doing a 2 year deal. Once you accelerate the rate high enough, you have sellers getting on the phone saying things like, we actually only do 2 year deals. Our standard contract term is 2 year. They don't even open the door for 1 year because they know how much that'll impact their commissions and they're heavily demotivated from that, for example. We've seen that. This is a case of pulling a lot of this information forward, but also motivating and changing the behavior of the seller to make it worth their while in their wallet to drive the type of revenue you want here. Jack, I'm interested. You were nodding along. I'm interested in anything to add there.
I'm a huge fan of visibility amongst those teams, especially because sales reps are inherently competitive with each other. So HubSpot's about an 18-year-old company at this point. I believe for the past 18 years, every month, a few times towards the end of the month, we send out what we call the waterfall, which is essentially just a giant list of every single rep and where they stand in month. And it's an intense thing, but it's also extremely motivating. This obviously is not a virtual background. Like I actually am in the office and just chatting with our sales team and keeping your eyes open or your ears open right over there. People are constantly saying, oh, I see you at the top of the waterfall, or where are you with this deal? Are you going to get over? And so the transparency around that can light a major fire under folks. And I can tell you all, it's driven our sales team forward for as long as I can remember.
And then I think topic wise, just we getting through overcoming some of these obstacles. I'd love to talk to David a little bit more about this from you. I'm interested like how you think about some of these key obstacles and how your sales team thinks about some of the key obstacles in terms of, hey, pushbacks on red line. Like how do you avoid some of these things in terms of really intense contract red lines or unresponsiveness, or how do you think your sales team does this particularly well?
Yeah, I think it goes back to my comment previously around identifying potential areas of friction and really solving for those up front so we don't run into these challenges at the end of the deal. Ryan, you talked about really mapping out processes. I think another sort of adjacent process is really what are all the elements that you need to check off to make sure a deal is closed? So what our sellers want to avoid is a situation, for example, you come back with red lines and it's all about the DPA, right? Or it's another CISO requirement. And then suddenly your deal completely goes south because you're dealing with security and compliance. That checklist, if you have that up front, you would know to start asking about the security review or the security questions way at the beginning of the cycle instead of doing that at the end. So it's a combination of just trying to identify what the potential pitfalls up front and making sure that sellers are attacking all those pitfalls in parallel.
One of the things that's been really helpful for us in this too is like having a trust center or trust site with all the top like documentation that customers want. So your SOC 2s, your DPAs, your terms, your GDPR compliance, what have you, having that be like publicly available for buyers who oftentimes on a first demo, it can feel a little clunky to be like, what's your contract review process? Or on a first demo to be like, okay, what is your legal review? It feels like you're getting a little, it might feel like you're getting a little over your skis. But after a next steps call, just to say, hey, if we get to that point, you're aware, here's a site where your security team could access all the stuff they want. It's like a confident but casual way to just say, hey, when you go through this review, you're probably going to have questions about these sorts of things. Here's where you can access them easily. And it shows that you've gone through this rodeo like many times before. Having like publicly facing PDFs on like top security questions that you tend to get. How do you store with QuotaPath, right? How do you sync data from different sources? How do you store data? What's your data deletion process? Like having that long list of FAQs has also proven really fruitful for us in these processes to pull a bunch of this stuff super forward in our sales process. We're still learning. We're not perfect at this, but it's definitely a priority for us as well. Wrapping up here, I know we're heading out of time. These are some of the big things that we've been talking about thematically, which has been really how do you centralize your seller's workflow within HubSpot and pair adjacent apps to drive them to deliver the right revenue and drive it quickly and drive down some of those sales cycle delays by motivating the seller to deliver great contract terms or great types of revenue and close it quickly through some of these HubSpot app partners, automate that process installing, offering like good billing options for the buyer, but then also ensuring the seller understands why do I care about net 30 versus net 90? Why do I care about longer term contracts? Why do I care about limited red lines? And walking them through what happens when a red line happens so that they know why to avoid these in the future. So thank you for driving. I was interested. Jack, anything to add there as we close or things that you're thinking about?
Just like zooming out and thought that I've had the entire time. Like Matt, I think you and your team are putting your finger on something when you talk about RevOps, and we've mentioned the go-to-market teams. We've mentioned revenue management. I've talked to so many HubSpot users over the years that think about their go-to-market through the lens of my marketing function needs to generate more leads, and then my sales function needs to, improve sales efficiency and close more deals, and my customer teams need to answer questions faster. And I found that if you think about things through that siloed lens, you're not actually zooming out and seeing that entire revenue operations picture. And so taking that big step back and saying, where are all of my teams going to be working? How do all of the tools that they're going to be using come together? What do these handoffs look like? That's what real RevOps looks like to me. And so I just encourage folks to not think about things through the lens of this specific function, but to take that bigger step back and say, how does this impact the entire customer journey?
Yeah, there were a couple questions that popped up from Chris. I appreciate them, Chris. I think the one was like on why sellers should care about customer payment terms apart from the commission side of the house. There is a question around the other one I would really be thinking about is the customer viability if they're on too long of a payment term. What is the risk of non-payment if they're on too long of a payment term? And then how does that impact their future in a customer? Also for like revenue retention purposes. And that's a lot of what I've been talking about with my team is like, how is the revenue that you're bringing forth for the business impacting gross revenue retention and net revenue retention down the line? And our business has to be in a healthy gross and net revenue retention perspective to drive increased investment and continue to grow. So you as a seller care about it because your equity will depends on strong gross and net revenue retention and the success of the company. And so I think circling back to that key metric for the seller and showing them how what they're doing at the top of the funnel impacts that has been super fruitful for us. We talk about QuotaPath's GRR and NRR as a company weekly and go through it in a lot of detail because it's not like an account management thing. It's a broader organizational thing to make sure revenue retention is where it needs to be. So that's my 2 cents there on why should sellers care about payment terms, but interesting nonetheless.
Yeah.
Cool.
Well, I think
I think we're at
to your
time, right,
point,
Matt?
they won't care unless you tell them why they should.
Exactly. Why should you care and how does it impact either your cash viability or the viability of the business?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Right. Yeah, you care about payment terms. The longer the payment term, more risk it is that they won't pay. If we don't have customers paying, we can't pay you commissions, right? These things are all tied together. But yeah, but a lot of times, right, like people are the other piece that you've obviously talked a lot about, Ryan, is people are like care about the things they're incentivized also to care about. And it's just a matter of communicating why these things are important or giving them a specific incentive. Like you said, if subpar deal terms or something else is going to be part of a something that impacts commission, this is one of those elements that can influence that. Like those are all things that can go into the answer the question of why people should care. But makes a lot of sense. We talked a lot about details around HubSpot tooling, automations, commissions. We've collected a whole lot of thoughts and kind of knowledge bombs from the crew. So Jack, David, Ryan, thank you guys very much for joining, for giving us an hour of your time and dropping some knowledge on all of the things when it comes to the last mile, which I think is always super, super hard, super challenging. It's the last thing, right? So you're like, I've already did the work, but it's where there's just so much, there can be so much pain, but also when you fix those things, so much value as well, which is why we were all here today. So to all the attendees out there, thank you very much for attending. After you drop, you'll get prompted to fill out a 2-question survey about the event today. If you can just provide some feedback, that would be awesome. But I'm not going to keep you any longer. So with that, I'll let you all run. Have a great rest of your day. Have a good evening, and I'll see you on the flip side at the next one. Take care, everybody.
Thanks, team. See
Thank
ya.
you, everybody.
Bye.